What's going on, everybody? My name's Asante.
And I'm Abby. And today we are here with a wonderful Hailey talking about finding your purpose and your passion.
Hi.
And I just want to give a big shout out to Cameco for sponsoring today's video. Thank you very much. So Hailey, welcome to the Inspire Magazine podcast. We're very happy to have you. Why don't you start off just telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Yeah, no, thank you for having me. So I'm Hailey. I'm the executive director at Causeway Work Center in Ottawa. We're an organization that supports people who've had some form of barrier or challenge in accessing meaningful work, find opportunities in community. So we run a whole variety of different programs, from in-community employment programs, youth programs. We have social enterprises that we run to provide skills development and experience opportunities for people, as well as wraparounds in mental health and in wellness.
Big question, for me, Hailey, and I think this will help lead us into our conversation is, why did you choose to do the thing that you're doing?
That's a great question. I have always been fascinated by people. And I think from the time I was quite young, I always knew I wanted to do a job where I had an opportunity to explore the potential in people. Like, I always like to get to know, what strengths and gifts and talents people had, even things they didn't often see in themselves. There was something that I always found really appealing in sitting down with someone and understanding their story and getting to know who they were and being able to point things out of, you seem really excited when you talk about this, or this thing really lights you up. And so I always wanted to go into a space where I had a chance to do that. I originally thought I was going to go into more kind of one-on-one support and do counseling or psychology, and I did my degree in psychology. But I realized really early on that I also loved identifying patterns in systems. So the same thing I like seeing in people, I also liked seeing in systems. And so when I first had an opportunity to see how an organization worked and how it could be improved upon and how teams could be developed to have more impact, that also drew me equally, if not more. And so getting to do the two things together was what I ultimately really wanted to do with my time. And every day I am grateful that I took a route that I didn't initially think I was going to take and did something that I could incorporate the people aspect with all of these other things that I also really enjoy doing. Plus, I get bored very easily. So having many different hats to wear is important for keeping my attention.
That sounds very, very interesting, very exciting. Definitely doesn't seem like it would ever get boring. What have you learned on this journey, as you called it, discovering people and systems? Like, has there been like one lesson that you've learned that's just like kind of stuck with you?
I think, I've done a lot of different work in this space. I've worked in, distress centers. I've worked in sexual health. I've worked in disability support. Now I'm working in employment, and any of the organizations that I've worked in any of the capacities that I've supported people, I think the underlying thing I always think about is just the impact that you can have without knowing that you're having it on someone, and the ripple effect that can have. If you're a leader in an organization and you're working with your team and you're coming from a place of honesty and integrity and vulnerability and how you interact with your team, that has an impact on how they interact with their team. That has an impact on how they interact with the people that are supported by the organization. And I always try to make sure that I don't take that for granted in the work that I'm doing. And I think about how I support the people around me, because that's going to impact how they support people, how they support people, how they support people, and how communities are ultimately impacted. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest lesson I've learned, is that you don't recognize sometimes how little interactions or things that you think maybe are a little bit innocuous or that were just a split second can actually have an impact and have a roll-on effect on so many other things.
Brings me to a question, did anybody or anything have that sort of impact on you that kind of influenced you to say, hey, this is the thing that I would like to give to others?
Yeah, there's been several people along the way. I think everywhere I've been, I've learned from someone. And I think one of the things that really stands out for me, I spent 5 years working in disability services in the Yukon, and I worked with this amazing group of people with neurodevelopmental disabilities doing person-centered planning. And I learned more from them than I learned from any of my colleagues. Like the way that people saw their life and what they wanted to experience and the kinds of opportunities they wanted to have that a lot of people would take for granted, but that were not, implied or guaranteed for the people that we were supporting in that organization. Things like having relationships and being able to work in a job that you want to do, or having a job and being able to choose a different one. Like, those are things I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about on a regular basis because those choices are there. And for them, it was a lot more intentional, and they had to think a lot more about what they wanted on a day-to-day basis. And so, yeah, working in that space just made me so much more focused on how do we support people to have self-determination, and how do we encourage people who have been told a lot of messages about who they are and what they're capable of and what's possible for them, that really become this part of this narrative that is inside them of, oh, well, so and so told me this, or I've been told this 300 times about, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not this enough. And it becomes part of what we think about ourselves. And that had a huge impact on how I wanted to work moving forward in any capacity of wanting to support people to see that they are so much more than people tell them they are, and that there's all of these talents and abilities and gifts that we're not necessarily supporting them to see.
It's amazing.
So it sounds, Hailey, like you've definitely discovered your passion, and within your passion, kind of sounds like you've discovered your purpose. So I'm curious on the end part of what you were saying, the narrative that's inside everyone, like kind of following the system that's been laid out for them. So my question is, what is the correlation between purpose and mental health?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and one that I think about a lot. I think, we tell people that it's important to find their purpose, that the only work that's worth doing is work that you're passionate about, and that gives you this endless, boundless energy. And I think that's a really beautiful concept. And I do believe that we should be encouraging, and supporting everyone to pursue opportunities that are meaningful and that feel enriching. But I think there's a lot of challenge from a couple of perspectives that put a lot of pressure on people when it comes to figuring out what that looks like and what that passion is for them, or what that purpose is for them. I think one of those things, as I said, is those internalized expectations. Maybe it's from their family, maybe it's from social systems, about what you're supposed to be doing with your time, or what your future is supposed to look like. I think especially for young people, there's expectations from family that they should be pursuing a job that has a certain status, or that, they're supposed to go into a certain program, or that maybe it's about a certain amount of stability that they need to be able to pursue in a career. Like, there's a lot of assumptions that go into that. And same thing in our social systems, that we have a lot of messages around, what you're good at from a really young age of, oh, you're not very artistic, or, you're not good at math, or maybe you don't have the best time management skills, or whatever it might be. Those messages get reinforced at a really young age of, these are things you're good at and these are things that you're not. And that really discourages people from being able to pursue things that might end up being, really meaningful or purposeful to them, or being able to see it in a different context. I think about people that I know who were told, they're not very creative, but they work in jobs where they actually do creative thinking all the time, but maybe not in the way that people usually express creativity. Maybe they're not great at painting or drawing or writing, but they, they create these amazing programs, or they're doing, they're creating programs, or they're, working on policy from a completely new and different angle. And I think we set expectations from a time when people are young, that these are the things that you can pursue a purpose and a path with, and these are the things that maybe you should steer clear of. And I think that becomes ingrained really, really early on.
So, in your experience, with the people you work with, young people in particular, with these narratives that are given to folks, what is the impact that you see when folks internalize that narrative, and maybe, that becomes a little challenging for them?
Yeah, I would say a few things happen. I think one of the things that someone said to me a long time ago, and it's just kind of stuck in my mind ever since then, is usually the voice that you hear inside your head that's criticizing you and saying terrible things is, if you listen hard enough, it's not usually your own voice. And that's something I always think of, even for myself. Like when I'm self-critical, I think about, whose voice is this really? Is it my voice, or is it the voice of someone I knew, or the voice of someone who said this thing to me? And when people internalize those messages, it takes away a lot of possibility. Like, it narrows down your option, because you're listening to this continuously shorter list of options of, you could maybe do this, or you could maybe do that. And then your openness to looking at possibility and to trying different things maybe is a little bit more limited, because you're like, well, I already know I'm not going to be good at that, because I've heard this over and over again, so why bother trying? Or, not knowing that, you change substantially over the course of your life, and something that maybe you didn't find interesting, or that you found difficult 10 years ago because it was taught to you in a way that you didn't really take interest in, or wasn't engaging, or wasn't the way that you learn, that might be different now. But, if you were always told you weren't great at math, but your math teacher had you read a textbook, and that was not the way you absorb information, like you needed to have a conversation, and you needed to understand the rationale, and you needed to see visuals, but that's not how it was communicated, then you still hold that space in your mind that says this is not something for you. And maybe you could have incredible ability at it if it was presented to you in a different way, in a different time, in a different space in your life. And so I think that it limits our capacity to see possibility, and it also it discourages us from seeing strengths in different areas of our life, of being able to pinpoint the good things, of being able to see some of the experiences that we have as expertise. People who've been through a lot of challenging experiences in their life, they have so many skills that come from that. Being able to go through all of that negative internalized belief means that you're resilient, because you've heard a lot of things, that you've continued to keep going. You have a lot of adaptability, because you've been in situations that maybe weren't supportive of you, and maybe you're not in those anymore, or you've had to create and evolve strategies to be able to deal with those environments. And so I think it holds us to this place where the things that we don't like about ourselves hold much more value to us, and the things that are really amazing about who we are.
Absolutely. When you internalize kind of your youth, it can definitely have a negative effect, discovering your passion, your career, your purpose. So my question is kind of a two-part. I want to know, in your opinion, what steps can someone take, say a young person who's maybe in high school or university, and they're just trying to figure out their passion, they don't know what to do, or even an adult who say it's already a career, and they've decided and figured out oh my God, it's not what I want to be doing. What steps can they take to try and change the narrative?
I think it's a few things. I think number one, go back to some of the things that you've told yourself that you're not good at, and really like dig deep on whether or not that's true. How do you know that to be true? Where does that come from? If you've been doing, I don't know, you really are interested in trying dance, but you've been told you're not very coordinated. Like, is that true? Or is that something you tried once and someone pointed it out and you've never tried it again? Or is that something that your family would say to you, in a joking way at a, I don't know, family dinner? Like, being able to really dive deeper and make a list of, like, these are the things that I feel really proud of about myself, things that I'm interested in, things that when I try feel good and feel enriching, and what could I explore with that, and be open to being curious about what that means for yourself. I think it also means, having a lot of self-compassion, that you're going to, if you want to figure out, what is something that you're really interested in, or something that you find really meaningful, like, it's going to take trial and error. And there's no like magical way of doing that. You need to try different things, and we need to encourage people to try and be exposed to different kinds of opportunities, and get to know different kinds of people, so you can hear different ideas and different experiences. I think especially with young people, we're often putting them in a place where we don't expose them to many different options, where maybe you hear when you're in school that you need to pick a program that has a specific job attached to it. You go into accounting to become an accountant, and you take engineering to become an engineer, and you go into teaching to become a teacher. But we don't talk about some of the unconventional career paths that people take, or nonlinear career paths that people take, that a collection of experiences actually can add up to something that is a lot more enjoyable, because you've tried different things and you pick little components as you go. I think, even for myself, I've done lots of different things. And so I've had an opportunity to be in different environments and test what I like and what I don't, and what I like to take away from each one, and what I might want to leave behind. And so having a opportunity to try different things, I think, can be really enriching. And I think too, talking to people about different work options. I think that sometimes we make choices early on and think that we can't undo them, where you need to get on a path and stay on that path forever. Of, you take this track and you get this job, and then you move up and you're promoted in that industry, and that's kind of the expectation moving forward. But, what exposure do you have to what that really looks like? Have you talked to somebody who's in that career field and asked them kind of what their day-to-day looks like? What are the things what kind of stressors do they have? What do they enjoy doing in their job? Do they have a lot of work-life balance? Do they have vacation time? Like, finding out more about what the day-to-day would look like going into those different roles, and exploring whether or not that's something that you're interested in. And I think, taking an opportunity to get to know yourself outside of what you might be doing. I think sometimes, we can go back to the things that we loved when we were kids. If you loved, coloring, if you loved writing in a notebook, if you loved playing sports, like whatever it might be, there might be something there that's part of this deeper attraction, and it could be applied to lots of different situations. And so I think sometimes we think, whether it's with creativity or it's with analytical thinking, we think that you need to pick the one thing and apply it to a job that does that one thing. But really, there's so many different aspects of our personality that we can bring to a lot of different environments. So thinking about, what do I really like doing, and how could I integrate that no matter where I'm working and no matter what I'm doing with my time?
Wow, that's an amazing answer. Thank you. Really good advice. I wish I had you in my life when I was 17. But
I wish I had told myself this when I was
17. Right. So well, maybe let's dive into that then. Like, what was a narrative for you that had to change? And maybe just elaborate on that and tell us, how that was, how that worked out for you.
Yeah, I think, for me, growing up, I was really the kind of person that was super preoccupied with who I was for other people. So I spent, a lot of my time focused on being the best possible daughter, and the most responsible student, and the most caring, drop everything in a second friend for people. And that's where I got a lot of my self-worth of, the external praise for being these different roles for other people. And it took me a long time to realize, that for the most of my childhood and most of my teens and into my early 20s, like I didn't really focus on what I needed. Like it wasn't really about me. It was about everyone else. And, I gave a lot of my energy away, and I did a lot of soothing behaviors over time. I had a pretty significant history in my teens and early 20s of binge eating and of anxiety and just not feeling like I had a self to focus on, or that was important. I think it was really, I saw my value in what I could be for everybody else. And, that was a really hard thing to move away from. I think especially because that was the root of wanting to help other people. I think it came from a really good place of wanting to support others in my life and wanting to be, the person that was there for them when they needed someone, or be the person who, could be the ear if they needed someone to talk to. But I often didn't collect that back for myself. And, it was a really tough awakening in my 20s, where I started to really reflect on a lot of my relationships and think about, like, is the way that I'm living my life good for me? Like, I know that I'm doing good, and I know that I'm having a positive impact somewhere, but also, am I? And I had a pretty significant questioning of, is the fact that I'm giving all of this energy away really helping other people? Because it's probably not. I created a lot of dependent relationships where, people didn't really have other outlets. They just came to me. And so that wasn't really the healthiest thing. And I didn't really have a lot of outlets for myself. And so, into my 20s, working through rewriting my own narrative of what I was and where my value came from, and recognizing that my own self-care was important, and that I was going to be so much more capable of supporting other people and having this purposeful experience if I cared about my own needs. And I put those first, and I set healthy boundaries, and I told people no when I meant no, not, yeah, I guess I'll do it. And then I was just, empty at the end of the day. It really took that self-reflective practice of recognizing that my needs were important in order to be able to make choices that would allow me to pursue things that are enriching and passionate. I don't think I would be in the situation I'm in if I just kept doing things the way that I was doing them. But I also don't think I would learn as much as I have if I hadn't, lived in the way that I did. So yeah, that's kind of a confusing answer to your question, but it's I think a long journey of realization that we're socialized sometimes that other people being happy is more important than us being happy, and what we can give to other people is much more of a say of who we are, and be selfless and be giving and be there for everybody else. But I think you're so much more capable of being a support network for other people and doing work that enriches the life of other people if you also recognize your own needs and your own worth and your own boundaries.
So Hailey, I want to touch back on when you were in your 20s and you had that moment of clarity, that aha moment. And I just want to know, do you think people who maybe were at the same stage in life with when you were 17, and you said you had a lot of internal dependencies, you weren't depending on everyone else, and you weren't really reaching in and, discovering what makes you happy. And so I guess my question is, do you think that that moment of clarity in your 20s is something that happens with maturity, or do you think that, going back to when you were 17, the education system, do you think they could open some more doors to more exposure and I guess more help for other 17-year-olds trying to discover their passion?
Yeah, I think, absolutely, if we could create systems that support people to be curious and encourage them to look at a whole variety of possibilities and see these little intricacies and talents and strengths as things that they could leverage for the future. I think we don't dive deep enough into people. We kind of identify, okay, here's your couple of subjects and here's your grades in those subjects, therefore you're good at these couple of things, versus maybe if you're someone who's really compassionate, or you're someone who's really questioning, like you're always trying to dive deeper, you do a lot of research, you love to explore new ideas or cultures, or you're someone who is really tactile, you're always trying new things, you're the person who takes up all these different hobbies like sewing and guitar, and then you do painting, and then you play basketball, like whatever it might be. Being able to support people to see all of those things as components of their strengths, rather than just these academic aspects of what they're good at being what they should focus on as they move forward, because ultimately those are the things that you take with you. You don't take content that you learn with you, like you learn to read and you learn to write, and there's basic things that we all need as a foundation, but so much of the content that we learn, it's not things that we take with us, but our experiences and what we learn about ourselves, and the opportunity to teach young people about stress management and healthy boundaries, and understanding and appreciating their own emotions, and that it's okay to feel this wide spectrum of emotional responses, like that's human, and encourage people to talk about when they're not feeling heard, or when they're not feeling understood, and encouraging them to explore maybe some of the areas where they feel like they aren't doing as well, and find out a little bit more why that is. Like, what is it that makes this hard for you? Is it the way that it's being taught? I know, when I was in university, I took several statistics courses, which I did not enjoy. But in my last year of university, I took a course that had a lot of statistics, but it wasn't a statistics course. But the professor that was teaching it explained the rationale behind the formula of like, we're doing this because of that. And all of a sudden it clicked for me, because just seeing a formula didn't help me understand why I was doing something. And so we also need to look at, how are we teaching people? Are we really getting to know what their learning styles are, what their learning strategies might be when it comes to exploring different aspects of learning? Because really, we can hold a lot of people back from trying things that they might enjoy because they've learned it in a way that isn't appealing to them or doesn't really click with them. And so being able to have a more customized approach to education, I think, would make a huge difference in how people identify what it is they enjoy and their passions. And I think at a young age, exposing people to different types of work. We talk a lot about entrepreneurship, but there's not a lot of entrepreneurship education, talking to people about what it is to own their own business, or the skills that you would need, or, what are some careers that people are doing that have only just existed in the last 10, 15 years that, are going to continue to evolve and expand over time and become more a part of our labor force. Like, there's just a lot of pieces that we don't talk about early enough. And I think the last piece I'll say with your question is telling people that it's okay to not know when they're 17 what they're going to do with their life. Like, you don't need to know, and you don't need to have everything figured out at that time. You can change your mind, and you can do different things, and you can like something for 3 years and then get bored of it and do something else. Like, we don't encourage the narrative that it's okay to grow and evolve and become a different version of yourself at different points in your life and be fulfilled by different things, and that you're not stuck at 17 making a choice that you have to now stick to for the rest of your life. You can do other things, and you can explore different aspects of yourself, and you can become a different person, because we should encourage everybody to want to become a different version of themselves. I am glad I'm not the same person I was when I was 17, and I hope that 10 years from now I'm a different person too, because that means I've grown and I've learned new things and I've evolved and I've been exposed to lots of different ways of thinking, and I've incorporated them, and I've become a better version of myself. So yeah, you don't need to know right this second.
You know, it's really interesting to hear you say that because, I think a lot of people sometimes they get stuck and, it's like they hit 25 or, they finish their university education. They're like, they start the job that they prepared themselves for and they realize that this is not for them, So when that happens, how does someone give themselves permission to make the change and to really venture out into a new path to change the narrative in their life?
Yeah, I think that's going to be individual for each person. I think it depends on asking yourself, like, why you made that choice in the first place. Is it, as we were talking about earlier, is it because you were encouraged by the opinions and perspectives of other people to make that choice and you didn't really want to do it in the first place, but your parents wanted you to go down this path, or you thought it would be really stable or be well paying or whatever it was that you thought you were going to get at the end, that didn't really come to be? Was it that, or was it that you were exposed to different things along, or was it that or the environment that you're in is not exactly the kind of environment that you imagined yourself working in, or maybe you learned along the way that having more freedom over your own time is something that's really important to you versus, having a set schedule. Like I think having the courage to ask yourself those questions is a really important first step. And I think having the self-compassion to recognize that it's okay if you don't like what you're doing. You don't need to stay there. You need to maybe have a plan of how you're going to transition and look at what the other possibilities could be and have some ideas of where you want to go. But that, if you've learned along the way that you're a different person than you thought you were, or that the outcome that you were seeking is different than you expected it to be, or the kind of environments that you ended up in were not the ones that were supportive of who you are and who you want to become and who you know yourself to be, like, that's okay. And I think, one of the things to always ask in those situations is it what I'm doing or is it what I'm surrounded by? Because I've definitely been in situations, and I think I'm sure most people have, where they're doing something that they generally like, but they're in an environment that is not supportive, or they're in an environment that has a lot of toxicity, or they're around people that are not necessarily they're kind of people that they want to be with. And so that can also have a really big impact on how you interpret the work that you're doing. So also looking at the environmental factors of, do you feel like you're in an inclusive space where you can be yourself and you can show up as who you are at work, or do you feel like you have to put on a mask and 20 layers to be present? And that might also be part of the reason why it's not enjoyable. So I think it's looking at, is it what I'm doing or is it where I am? And asking those questions and looking a little bit more deeply there.
My question, Hailey, is when you said, is it what I'm doing or is it who I'm surrounded by? And I want to touch that, tie that into social media. Even apps like Instagram and TikTok, we have access to so many people's lives right at the tip of our finger. And with that comes comparison, and really unhealthy comparison. And even I'll see, 8 different 18-year-olds in university, like, posting about their grades, what they're doing for like the holidays, and even just like simple stuff like that, or like, their life goals. And the comparison is really, it adds a lot of pressure onto already stacked pressure with like deciding your career path and trying to make a future for yourself. So I kind of want to get your opinion on how social media either encourages in some aspects or really discourages the search to look for your own potential.
Yeah, I think social media has the potential to do a lot of good and a lot of bad. I think nothing is one way or the other. It's how you use it and what you surround yourself with. I think, if you're constantly, going on Instagram or TikTok and your feed is all of these people that make you feel really bad about yourself, then obviously that's going to create this sense of comparison. It's going to further exacerbate this feeling that you have of not not feeling good enough or ready enough or not knowing what you're supposed to be doing. But then on the flip side, if you change what you're consuming, that can also be really inspiring. And if you have lots of different people doing lots of different things, who have different kinds of lives, who are sharing the good moments and the bad moments, and who are being honest and authentic and real, like that can be a really positive influence. So I think it definitely depends on how you're interacting with it. I think it's also really helpful to think about, if you're comparing yourself to someone who has, this life that you're aspiring to, or there's things that they're showing that you look at and you're like, wow, I really want that. Number one, you don't ever know anyone's full story. And it's important to remember that social media is just a snapshot in someone's day or someone's life, and you can curate it as much or as little as you want to. And so I think taking everything with a grain of salt, and not assuming that, you have a full, someone's full human experience in front of you, that it's just a piece of that. But I think also remembering that, you're comparing yourself to someone, but they're probably comparing themselves to someone else, and they're comparing themselves to someone, like everyone does that. And I think as soon as we realize that, it's such a human condition to look for something beyond yourself, and that no matter where you are, you're probably going to do that to some extent. I think that can be really freeing to remember that, even the person with the most amazing looking life in the world is looking at somebody else with a more amazing looking life. And being able to dial it back and say, that's great, but in where I am in this moment, in my present day and time, like, what do I have around me? I think being able to do like a regular self-reflective practice, I try to do that of, did I have a day that I felt good about? Did I enjoy, the time that I spent? Did I feel like I had a positive impact on someone or something today? Do I feel like I learned something? Like asking myself those questions on a regular basis and reflecting on how I want to show up each day, I think can take some of the sting out of that comparison, because it takes your goals away from being this huge in the future thing to just, okay, what can I accomplish in the next 24 hours or the next week of my life? I think one of the things that makes comparison so much tougher is when we set these goals for ourselves that are so big and lofty and, have years between us and them. And all we can do is look for other people that we think have reached that, when we haven't really taken a step back to appreciate how far we've come from wherever we were before. Of, you've done something today that yourself 3 days ago or 3 months ago or 3 years ago would be proud to say that they did. And so I think it's appreciating little steps along the way, and also appreciating that, we're all human and we all are going to move at a different pace, and you don't need to be at the pace of anybody else but yourself.
Wow. Wow. You're dropping a lot of gems. So, you've touched on the self-reflection piece a few times in our conversation. And I think self-reflection, especially when you're new to it, can be, a little scary. So, and sometimes with that self-reflection, you find things and you do discover, wow, I'm not on the life path or doing the thing or with the people or in the environment that I want to be or need to be in. And I think that can be really sometimes, taken the wrong way, that can be crippling for folks. So how can you flip that on its head? And instead of that realization or realizations of those kind being crippling, how can you make those realizations be empowering and be motivating and inspiring to, move forward differently?
Yeah. Well, I think that taking a look at ourselves is one of the most uncomfortable things for everybody. I think appreciating that just as it is, that nobody really loves self-reflection in the beginning. That for anyone, no matter what you think their life is, no matter what, what challenges they've been through or haven't been through or that of, doesn't really matter. I think that for everybody, we're taught to look outside of ourselves. Like, we're encouraged to look out there at other people, and we're not encouraged to look at ourselves. So yeah, it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and it's okay to, you know, appreciate that you feel uncomfortable, and, you know, give yourself courage to dive into who you are a little bit more deeply. But I think to your question about how do you see some of the things that you've identified as empowering, I think number one, it takes so much strength and resilience to even ask yourself those questions. Like, that's empowering in and of itself. Like, to be the kind of person that is okay, you know, looking in the mirror and asking some tough questions and facing some of the answers that you hear back from yourself, like, that's really hard and really amazing in and of itself. But what you hear there, even if you don't like it, getting to know who you are is going to be one step closer to figuring out what you want. And so even if you you know, think about the things that you don't like about your life right now, being able to identify, I don't really like this or that, is a bigger clue in what you maybe want to look at moving forward. It gives you some insight into what doesn't work for you or what doesn't feel the best. But being able to turn that around, one thing, you know, I encourage everyone, if you ever have the opportunity to have some kind of coaching or like someone that you can have ask you these questions objectively back at you, to try it. Because I did some coaching earlier this year, and the coach that I was working with, she asked me to tell her about some of the things I wanted to work on, some of the goals that I had for myself. And they were all things, you know, that I had, the way I wrote the goal was as a deficit, like, oh, I want to get better at this, or, you know, my time management's not that great, or I want to, you know, whatever it might have been. I can't even remember. But the first thing she said to me is, what if you took all of those goals that you said were deficits and you turned them around to identify how those things were actually serving you? And I'm like, what? But it got me to think about it differently, of maybe if I'm not focusing super attentively on one thing at a time and I'm floating from one thing to another, I actually have a lot more creative capacity. And I can, you know, explore different ideas that maybe I wouldn't have touched on if I was more focused. Like if that was my goal, or if I wanted to get better at, you know, asserting myself in terms of my communication, that having compassion for the other person and sitting and listening and in silence and getting a sense of the conversation before I reacted just shows that I'm actually being attentive and I'm being present. And so I don't have to be like right in there with my response. But that way of thinking, of taking the things that we see as deficits in ourselves and actually being able to turn them around and say, what does that do for you? And how is it useful? And how has it served you up until this point? I think was a really powerful tool for me. And that can be really empowering. And being able to look at some of the things that you've been through in your life that you found really challenging, or, you know, that you had a really hard time working through, being able to sit back and say, like, how has that made me stronger? And what have I learned from that? And what has it built inside me? Like, it's built resilience and adaptability and all of these things that you wouldn't have had if you hadn't been through whatever it is that you've been through. And so, yeah, seeing the power in your own experiences, I think, can be incredibly uplifting, and it can be a good source of recognition that you're so much more capable than you think you are. Because if you've been through some hard things and you got out the other side, like, that's incredible, and we should celebrate that more.
Wow. I love that. The power in your experiences definitely connects a lot with me. And I think it's just like a mindset thing, you know, this really, you know, bad, shitty thing might have happened, but there's always a flip side to everything, right? So I guess my question is, now that you have your power and your experiences, and you've done a lot of reflecting, and you've looked in yourself, and you've, you know, just discovered so much about life and purpose and passions, I want to go back to 17-year-old Hailey. And I'm wondering, do you have any advice that you wish you would just tell yourself?
I have like a book I would write for her if I could. No, I think, you know, I would want to let her know that, you know, all of these hopes and dreams that, you know, I had for myself, or these, you know, really specific ideas of who I was going to be and what I was going to do and what that was going to mean, that, you know, to let go of those and enjoy the journey. You know, I definitely think there have been moments throughout my life where I've been a lot more responsible, and it's been a great thing in lots of ways, but I think I missed a lot of opportunities to just be present and have fun and be who I was in the moment and just exist in that time and in that space. And that, you know, that's something I probably would have cherished a lot more of, you know, rather than trying to quicken myself to reach some kind of goal or be some kind of person or have some kind of job, to just appreciate the moment that I was in when I was in it. Because, like, I can't go back to those moments now. I can try to incorporate, you know, joy and fun and play in how I move forward in my life now. But I wish I had just appreciated that I could have had an opportunity to just indulge in those things more at that time. And I thought I needed to move a lot faster than I probably did. So that's what I would encourage myself to have done. But at the same time, you know, I don't regret anything because I've learned along the way, and you become who you are by virtue of the things that you tried and the things that you know, that didn't go so well and the lessons that you've learned. So I wouldn't change any of it, but I would definitely encourage anyone who's sitting in that chair at 17, who thinks like they have to figure the whole world out right now, to just have fun and enjoy. And as you get to know yourself, you'll figure out the path forward. And it might change, and it might change 20 more times, and that's fine. But the moment that you're in right now, I think is so much more precious than we give it credit for.
And you know, that I think that's such great advice. And at the same time, I think that's really challenging because there's so many things that are demanding of our attention these days. And you know, Abby was kind of touching on it earlier when we think about social media, and then you were touching on, you know, like your environment that you grew up in, your household, parents, you know, school, city, all of these things. You know, with all of these inputs coming into us, how do we figure out what is like the true journey for ourselves?
Yeah, I wish I had the answer to that question. You know, I think that's going to be, like, it's a hard question to answer because it's going to be so individual for each person. Not like we all, you know, we all need to find that out kind of for ourselves as we go. But I think that, you know, if something doesn't feel right to you, there's probably a reason. I think if you're like the example that you used, Abby, earlier of, you know, the social media and comparing yourself to other people, if you're constantly inundated by messages and, you know, perspectives or images or whatever it might be that make you feel bad about yourself, like those are the first thing I would say to do your best to, you know, at least like moderate a little bit more. You might not be able to get rid of them, like that's not necessarily possible, but being able to give yourself space for, you know, quiet and away from all of these messages of the world. Like, I know it sounds impossible, but I try like once a week to just not turn my phone on, just like one day a week. I just don't turn it on. I'm not always perfect at it. Sometimes I do anyway, but I try my best to have one day where I just don't interact with social media or with my email or with any of those outside forces. And I just try to do things that are in the moment, go for a walk and I read a book and I, pet a dog, like just do things that feel completely uncomplicated, because I think we create this narrative of complication as we expose ourselves to more and more and more of it. And it can take over these aspects of our life that, if we just turned it off, sometimes it would feel a lot more of a release. And you can't always do that. And you can't, turn off, the demands that are around you on an ongoing basis. Like we all have, and everyone has different circumstances, and there's things at home that, we can't turn off, or people that are around us or need us that we can't necessarily walk away from. But if you have opportunities to give yourself space and time, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, to just have quiet and do something that's for yourself away from all of that messaging, I think it can make it a little bit easier to have that self-reflective conversation, because it's hard to talk to yourself and you can't hear yourself over all this other noise.
Absolutely. I think that self-reflection and just having, that time to look in through yourself and, look at outside factors that maybe don't make you happy or don't bring you passion. I think that plays a big part in discovering and creating your own narrative, or maybe a narrative that adapts to, the narrative that was laid out for you, and just trying to find your place in the world, trying to find the speed that works for you. So I guess my question is, so you've definitely found your your passion through your purpose. And I guess I'm just wondering, is it possible to have passion and purpose as two separate things? Or do you think finding your purpose, like a career or a job, connects with your passion?
I think you can have both, and I think you can have them both be separate. I think it depends on what works for you. I think there's lots of people who would never want the thing that they're most passionate about to be their job, because it might ruin it for them. Like I know I have quite a few friends who they are really passionate about writing, but they would never want to write for a living, just because it's not like, because they just do it for themselves. And it's okay to have things that you're passionate about just for you. Like not everything has to be about, commoditizing your time. Like you can do things that you just enjoy for the sake of enjoying them. And there's absolutely, a need for that in your life. I think, you can find purpose in lots of different ways. I think the fact that we just talk about purpose from the standpoint of, employment is not necessarily always the most important thing. That there's lots of people who have purpose from their families, from their community, who volunteer and who do things, and that they really find enriching that way. There's people who have a sense of purpose from, the way that they move their body. Like there's lots of, I think, different ways of feeling that connection to some level of meaning, because ultimately I think purpose is about meaning and having something that's meaningful to you. And I think where that comes about in your life can be in lots of different spaces. I think ultimately, being able to do something on a daily basis that you like is important. And if you can find work that gives you that sense of satisfaction, I think that can be such a positive experience. But that doesn't have to be the only way of experiencing your purpose. And that can change along the way as well. I think if someone goes into a job for the first time and they don't like it, that doesn't necessarily mean like that's going to be the only way that they can find purpose. They might find it through, participating on a committee. Like there's different things that you can do, I think, in your life to gain a sense of satisfaction. I think when it comes to work, identifying what do you enjoy doing with your time, and how do the intangibles really make a difference for you? Because you might have a job that day to day is not like the most exciting, but it gives you a lot of vacation time, and you can use that to fund the things that you like doing with your free time. Or you might find work that is really emotionally, investing, like if you're doing work in social services or you're doing work in the nonprofit sector, like I am, like there's lots of people who they love their work, but it also can be a pretty big drain on their emotional energy. So being able to do things that give you passion in your spare time can help rejuvenate you back to the time that you're doing work. So I think it comes in many different forms and that it's unique for every person. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can find something in your life that you really love, that's just for you, and that if you took away all these other layers, you would feel this sense of satisfaction. I think that's something worth looking at.
Dropping gems. So, so a thing that's coming up for me as you say what you're saying is, it brings me back to an experience where I had with an ex where she said to me, Asante, you're doing too many things, right? And I'm, like you described earlier, Hailey, I'm just naturally this like curious person. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there like that. And to others, it might seem like they're going in a bunch of different directions that maybe are not connected to each other and they're like really divergent. What would you say to the young person who is that person who is going in a bunch of different directions and maybe feeling like that's not the way to find their purpose?
It goes back to that question of what does that feel like for you? If that feels good and you like trying new things and it gives you a lot of energy and it feels exciting to try different opportunities and engage different parts of yourself, like that's something to look at. If it feels really tiring and you feel like you have no energy at the end of the day and everything is drained from your soul, then that's also something to look at. So I think it's looking at like, what does that give you? Does it feel good or does it not feel good? I think that's a first question to ask. I think that, I think we don't talk about enough in our society about people who are multi-passionate. Like I think that there are lots of people who have more than one interest, or they have things that they get really invested in, but they have several areas where their knowledge is super deep. And I know a few people like that who know everything about movies, and they also know everything about this other thing, and they know everything about this other thing. And I think that's a quality that we tend to try to steer people away from. We try to encourage people like focus on this thing, like this is the thing that you should be spending all your time on. But if it gives you a sense of purpose and joy and fulfillment to have this kind of deep connection in these different areas and try new opportunities and be exposed to new things and talk to new people, and I think as long as that feels good and you are able to focus your time and energy in a way that meets your needs, like you're at the end of the day you have what you need to cover yourself. I think that's something to explore within yourself of where does that come from? Is it coming from a sense of curiosity, or is it coming from a sense of angst? Because that can also be a thing of if you don't ever feel satisfied by anything and you just keep looking but it feels angsty, then that's also something to explore. But if it feels good and it feels aligned, then that's something to look at too. And yeah, I am with you that I also am someone who pulls myself in lots of different directions, but I like that. I like having an opportunity to learn from different angles. And even if you can find work that does that for you, in the kind of job that I have lots of different areas of focus where, I do things in programs, but then I also know about our finances, but I work with our board, but I work in community, but I do public speaking, but I also do research. So I like that I have under the umbrella of this one role an opportunity to dive into lots of different areas. And so maybe looking at, where are the kinds of work opportunities to be able to wear many hats and to try different things and be in conversation with lots of different types of people, because that might be something to look at where it might not be doing 20 different things. It might be doing 20 different things under an umbrella of one thing. But I think everybody's situation is going to be their own. But yeah, coming back to that question around what does it feel like for you, and that being the driver of how you determine where you go next.
Wow, Hailey, everything you've said today has really just, I guess, put things in perspective. I'm, in my first year of university, and it's the time for decisions. It really is. Decisions that I made when I was 17, and now I'm living them. And it's definitely opened my mind to the possibility of change, and change is good and change is okay. And it doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong. To change is to be human. You've actually inspired me to pick up my guitar again and rediscover
I'm
some
glad I
old
can see it
passion.
behind you.
Yeah. I just want to say thank you so much for your insight. And Asante, do you have any last questions?
No, I'm good. I have a lot to walk away with. I'll definitely be watching this episode over and over again. So yeah, for me, my only thing is, Hailey, do you have anything that you want to say before we, sign off for tonight?
Just going back to what you were saying, Abby, my parting thought is just explore. Like, be okay exploring, being curious. Being curious, I think, is the most amazing and important human trait you can have, because it's the best way to discover things inside yourself and outside of yourself. If you're curious and you're open, then so many more possibilities become available to you. I think if you think that you only have one option, then only one option is going to be available. But if you're curious and you look at things from different angles and you get to know different perspectives and you expose yourself to different people and different opportunities and different ways of thinking, you're much more likely to find what it is that feels good for you because you've been open to it. And I think coming into any situation with openness is always a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, again, Hailey, I just want to say thank you so much for talking with us tonight. And I know, just like Asante said, I'm going to be walking away with lots to think about.